Today, I have the distinct pleasure of hosting this online event with Paul Hilsen, who is a managing partner at Elco Development, one of our partners. And a little bit about Elco. Elco is focusing on mobile and web app development, cloud consulting services. Paul is a former researcher and Intel analyst. His approach has been proven by synergizing novel tools and processes needed to take an idea, turn it into an app, and bring it to market with only 2 weeks. I will let Paul talk a little bit more about Elco probably further into the presentation. But without further ado, Paul, I just want to turn it over to you and help us understand here. From what I'm gathering, you are seeing something new happening in this marketplace, and it has to do with the synergetic approach to IT infrastructure and application to resolve management issues that have been long-standing. So why don't I just turn it over to you? Welcome here to Impact Webinars, and to allow you to guide us through this understanding this subject matter.
All right. Yeah, thanks, George, for that introduction. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. I'm really excited to present to you. What we have today is some insights into industries of what we're seeing right now. And George, thanks for kind of introducing me and what I've done. I've had the privilege to see this industry from a few different lenses, starting out as kind of like you said, an engineer, a researcher, going into the military, and of course, when you're there, you need software to work. There's just no question it needs to work, or there are going to be issues. And more recently, as a partner at Elko, I've been had the privilege to work with both Fortune 500, some Fortune 50 companies, and even some startups. And as part of that, every single day, I get to go talk to CIOs, CEOs, people, the IT teams, and see what's going on in their world. And as part of that, I want to share some of the insights of what I'm hearing from them and what we have done, especially recently with this ever-changing world, thanks to COVID and these extraordinary times, of what we have done to help with the management of applications. So I'm going to keep moving right along here. So we're going to start out here with something that's kind of a little bit more broad, and we're going to narrow it down as we go in here. One of the first things I want to talk about is the idea that you can't grow if you can't manage. And I'm talking specifically here about applications, right? If what we have seen, and there's been a lot of studies out there that I think a recent one looked at 3,700 different companies and saw that 72% of resources, of IT resources, are used just to keep the lights on. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for innovation. It doesn't leave a lot of room for improving processes. You are stuck with kind of just the status quo of having way too much to do and not enough resources to do it. And some of the inefficiencies that cause this, that really high percentage of those resources being used just to keep the lights on, there's a lot of them out there, but some of them that we might talk about here today is a lot of manual tasks. You're doing things manually by hand over and over again that, it can be automated down the road. The other thing with management is that you have a lack of maturity in monitoring or alerting. There's been issues where a customer knows that your application is down before you do. So there's a lot of areas that you can improve there. And one thing that we're going to dive into a decent amount today of why of something you need to avoid or we need to look at is the complexity of an application. The more complex an application is, the more time you need to put into it to care and feed it. And if you want to make changes to it, it takes all that much longer to be able to make sure that you didn't break something as you're adding features to it. So we'll keep moving along here. So this is a quote I've heard from a recent CEO that he said that hey, we have a laundry list of initiatives, and these are initiatives that he knows if he can get done, they're going to make a huge difference in the world today, and they're going to be a booming business. And that might be a list of 10, 20, 30 different initiatives, but because his teams are so bogged down, they're barely able to scratch the top 3 of them. So this is a real big problem that people are feeling out there in the world when it comes to the IT side of things. And also from the business side, other things that we've seen is people are talking about how, hey, their teams seem to always be in firefighting mode. They're always putting out fires, never able to step back and say, what can we do to improve these processes? It's just making sure the house isn't burned down. And one of those things that this might kind of roll up to is that people are seeing this as too much of OpEx, not enough CapEx. So we're going to talk today about how can we move IT teams and viewing them as an operating expense and moving them to more of a capital expenditure, I should say. So how are we moving from just keeping the lights on to bringing in more customers, finding new revenue streams, and leveraging our IT teams to do that? Another big pain point that we're going to be talking about a few times today are application heroes or an application that was made to ensure job security. Right. This is something that it's convoluted, it's complex, it's really long, and you have one person in your company that knows about it. And so if that person leaves your company, if that person goes on vacation, you are in a bad spot at that time. So those are some pain points that we've seen with trying to manage applications. And one thing that we kind of come back to is, companies want to pump in more money into this or put in more resources, and they're saying, hey, we want to add in all these new features, add in all these new products, but we need to make sure that if you're doubling the amount of products you have, doubling the amount of features, that you're not needing to double the amount of resources to manage them. So everyone's unique, right? There's going to be a specific solution to each company. But I want to point out some things that we're going to dive into today. The first one, and this term gets overused quite a bit, is DevOps, right? How are we taking something from a business idea and getting that into the market? And what's that time span? How do we minimize that? And not only getting into the market, but that feedback loop of getting that back to the developer of how did that perform? How are things working there? And of course, I should note right now that it's no question that we live in extraordinary times, and now more than ever, businesses need to be innovative. And we've been very, very impressed with what innovations have come out from businesses that we have worked with. So this has become, to be able to pivot and to be able to respond to these to kind of the world-changing events, DevOps has become even more popular now than ever to be able to not only stay relevant in today's world, but to, in a lot of cases, thrive due to the current environment. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. And it's not, I really want to stress throughout this presentation, DevOps is not, it's not a specific team. It's not some specific tools. It's people, it's processes, it's cultures, and technology. But notice I did not just say technology, right? It's broader than that. Now, the other big thing here too that we'll stress on is that you can't improve what you can't measure, or you don't measure or don't feel like measuring. If it's not enough for a CIO to a tech executive to say, we need to be better, build better applications. What does that mean? So things that we can measure, we'll be talking about here in a little bit. But the point of that being, if you do measure things, if you are taking metrics, you're able to make better business decisions in the long run. All right. So again, everyone's super unique and what solutions are needed to resolve the management mess that they are in. But two of the ones that we have come across pretty recently that we're going to talk about is one, reducing the complexity, and two, some culture shifts in implementing some DevOps best practices. All right, so here's where I'm hoping this gets a little bit exciting. So the topic, the complexity. We are talking now about complex applications. So what's wrong with the complex application? A lot of times you have applications that they are, there's a lot of lines of code not doing a lot of things. And really, when you have something that is complex like that, you're going to spend a lot of time just managing it, understanding what's happening with it. And if you need to, God help you, if you need to make changes to it or add features to it, those changes are coming not today, not tomorrow, but potentially months from now. We've worked with IT teams where the business has asked for a simple feature, and because the application is so complex that they say, IT team responds with, yeah, I'm hoping we can get that in the next 6 months kind of thing. And of course, that's, I think we can do better than that, right? And so we'll talk about kind of the lines of code and what that means. Also, we need to avoid depending on heroes on this. Heroes are single points of failure in a company. They are you need to pay them more, because if they leave, you're in a bad spot. Or if you want to onboard someone to a complex app, you're going to have to take an extremely long time to get them up to speed on something. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. And again, another quote that we've heard from business, hey, can you just add in this feature quickly? The response a lot of times is, yeah, we'll see you in 6 months kind of thing. So from the business perspective, when you have a complex application, some pain points are going to be that the new feature tends to be buggy or not fully vetted. One component of an application being complex is not just the lines of code. 10,000, 20,000 lines, for sure you're going to have a complex application, but also the code coverage on that. When we team up with Impact Group, when Impact Group takes on the infrastructure and they take on the networking and they do an amazing job with that, and we take on managing your applications, the first thing we look at is the amount of lines of code an application has and your code coverage. And that gives us a kind of nice rule of thumb of, hey, is this a complex app, moderate complex, or a simple app? And depending on where that falls in, you're looking at different price structures, more expensive monthly fee to manage a complex app, less for a moderate one, and even less so for the least amount of complexity there. Now, what we do and what we're going to kind of talk about here is when Elko is managing your applications, we're going to work to make this less complex over time. And there's a few strategies that we do to do that. And one, of course, more recent one, and one thing we'll kind of dive into a little bit of the technical side is working on your pipeline, your deployment pipelines. Here, this is something that we recently did with a client, and it's very close to this, not exact. And for me, this is a pretty ideal pipeline. I really like this one. It seems to cover most bases, and it's not overly complex. It's not overly simple. You have anything from of course, your unit testing, your backend testing, performance testing, and your security in here as well. I won't go into too many details here, but this particular client, I do want to focus on, I want to focus on one of these areas, and this is the consumer-driven contract testing, the PAT, that you see in the upper right. This particular client was having issues with having multiple different teams. And when one team would make a change to their product or to their domain, there's a high chance that they were going to break someone else's product that depended on their product functioning in a certain manner. So while all these other tests depend on you writing your own automated test. What PAX does is it's great because it's another team writing tests for you. And what that is doing is, if I depend on you and your API, your product for me to work, I'm running tests to make sure that every time you deploy, that my product will still work with that. If that test fails, you are not allowed to proceed. So this gives really quick feedback to developers that this company did not have before. And when things would go down, it would not be a few minutes and not be a few hours. It could be days that other teams are blocked. And this is a really great way. Sometimes something that's overlooked when you have multiple teams in a company, that people do not add in this consumer-driven contract testing. So that's something that I really like. And you know, you might have a pipeline that's more advanced. You might have a pipeline that's less advanced than this. It kind of depends on where you are at in your DevOps journey. And this is absolutely something that we work with you to help you advance this along. And we absolutely love doing this. And it's just one of the many different things that we can do to help you make your code not only less complex currently, but moving forward, making sure that you're avoiding kind of some of the pitfalls that are going to make it difficult to manage in the long term. So why are companies moving away from complex apps? Well, for a lot of the reasons I told you, right? That the more complex of an application you have, the more resources you need to dedicate towards managing that, which means less resources you have on being innovative, being able to do something new in the market, being able to capture new revenue streams. So this is a very concrete thing that we will come in and work with you on to make sure that that we make your apps less complex. And it can be, depending on where you're at, a pretty quick ROI for people. One thing I didn't mention about the CI/CD pipeline is eliminating code smells. There's no one code smell, and I'm just going to kind of focus and bang on the number of lines of code here, is when we set up the pipeline, what we have is something that we're able to see, hey, you have 10,000 lines of code here. Like, is that enough? That's enough to trigger a code smell, something that is potentially anti-pattern. It doesn't mean you're guilty, it doesn't mean this absolutely needs to change, but it's enough for us to investigate and see what is actually going on there. We had an example maybe just a few weeks ago where this comes into the code framework. Someone had an application in Java, and they were spending a lot of time and money on the upkeep of the application, and they had 1,000 lines of code that could have been done in 10 lines of code. The amount of complexity that you've reduced that application from going from 1,000 lines to 10 is huge. That's if you want to think about just reading time to understand what's going on there, that's right two orders of magnitude in reducing that the amount of time there, or I should say the amount of lines of code there. Another thing that we touch on when we go through and work with companies is reducing internal integrations. That's another line of complexity in applications. To take a step back here, if your application is like a garden and the weeds are the complex parts, it's hard in software to know what the weeds are. And sometimes you decide to throw a tarp over everything to kill off the whole garden and start fresh. Other times it does make more sense just go through and weed the specific ones, but that does take some time and does take some judgment calls. One of them is the reducing of internal integrations. And what happens here a lot is what we've seen is people have gotten a little over assertive on microservices. So something that is, and the general rule of thumb that we follow is that if you have more than 8 microservices for a given product, that's potentially a code smell. That's something for us to look into. We had a client who had a microservice for every single API, And the more microservices you have, the more internal integrations you have, the more unnecessary complexity you're adding to your application. Now, this is not to say you should have a monolithic one, but there is a balance between one monolithic application and 30 different microservices. I see that I am just rambling along here, so we're going to keep moving along to our next topic. Here's some basic solutions. We covered some of these, and of course, this all depends on what solution we have, which one we execute on. Is a little bit dependent on what we see there, and part of that, what we'll talk about next here, is looking into your DevOps maturity. So this brings us to our next topic, DevOps maturity and kind of the finger pointing conundrum. This happens when, I'm going to talk about the finger pointing issue. We in Impact Group and Elko have seen a few situations where you have a infrastructure support team, you have a networking support team, and you have an application support team. And a very common thing that happens here is the business sees that there's an issue, there's an outage, right? So the business goes to the infrastructure team. Hey, I think something's wrong here. Can you take a look at this? They take a look at it and they say, hey, not us. Talk to the networking guys, right? Networking team looks at it. They say it's not us. Application team looks at it and say it is an issue with the application. That's potentially hours or sometimes even days that the application team was not aware of this, was not looking at this, and really this results in longer down times. And this is a problem of just throwing things over the wall and saying it's someone else's problem. It's not mine. Typical frustration of business, right? Hours go by. Why can't this just get fixed, right? We had this working hours ago. What's the issue now? Some other pain points. Of course, this is wasted time. Businesses do not know where to go to when problems arise. Do I send a ticket to this team? Do I send it to another team? Just another consequence of not getting an outage resolved quickly is you increase that customer friction and lack of confidence in your with your customers to your product. So what are some ways that we have seen people overcome this? What are some things that people are doing now to change? Well, a lot of this comes, I'm going to summarize this in saying, taking on some DevOps best practices. And I want to make this clear that DevOps is a mindset. It is not it's not a tool. I said that before, and I think a lot of enterprises still kind of get confused about that. It's a culture, it's your people, it's your processes, and it's your technology. One big thing here that we have done to kind of help this problem of, hey, it's finger pointing, throwing things over the wall, is creating a collaborative environment. And one very concrete thing we've seen that we've tried with customers, and it's worked wonders, is to have a single dashboard in the room where they're developing, where the teams are. And that single dashboard shows your health checks, shows what's going on with your application. If that is red, all the teams are working to resolve that. And it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It doesn't matter if it's this team or this team. Usually it's a combination of teams that need to work together to resolve that. Another really big thing that I wish we had a lot of time to cover, but we don't, is when you want to make sure you're making the right decisions when you're, as a company, you want to measure outcomes, not measuring outputs. This has been incredibly successful for companies. And just a real quick example of this one would be, if I am a development team, I'm not measuring how many features I pumped out the last 3 or 4 months, right? If I spent $100,000 pumping out 50 features, but I got 2 new clients because of that, were you really successful there? That 50 features in a few weeks, a few months, whatever, might sound impressive, but that didn't align with the company goals. So measure your outcomes, and that would be, did you grow your revenue streams? Did you grow additional clients? Did you add value to the clients? start measuring those, not just your output. And the last one here is horizontal to vertical oriented teams. Create teams that are full stack teams. You have your an infrastructure person dedicated to that team. You have a developer dedicated. You have a designer dedicated to that team. So a lot of these kind of roll up to, or at least a few of them do, roll up to one thing that we really like to do with companies is to do an assessment on their DevOps maturity. It's a big chart. I know you can't see this. I'll just kind of give a high-level overview of this. What I've been saying over and over is DevOps is not just one thing. It is multiple things. So what we go in here and we do is we give you a grade for each of these areas, 1 to 5, on where's your maturity, where are you at with this? And from there, we make an actionable roadmap to how do you bring yourself from left to right here. And it's really exciting. Actually, it's not always bad if you're a 1 or a 2. We actually love that because that means you have a lot of low-hanging fruit to see a lot of see some quick ROI. I should see on just a little bit of work you're doing. It takes a little bit more work to go from 4 to 5 here. Here's a real quick specific example of one of those items zoomed in. I know we're running out of time, I think, so I'm going to keep moving along here.
I was going to ask you, Paul, going back to the previous slide.
Oh, sure.
It looks like a pretty elaborate process that's been outlined here, but would you have this in a file that if someone wanted to like pull it and download it and kind of look at it from the exam a little bit more detail, would that be something you might make available?
Good suggestion, and absolutely. After this webinar, we can make sure this is available for people to look at, ask questions on, and I love discussing this. This is a really exciting part of my job, doing this. Yeah, good point.
Thanks.
Anything else you want to add in, George? Looks like we're good. How are we looking on time, George?
4 minutes, and I did have some more questions, but why don't I just let you plow right through it as much as you can. So let's just try to wrap it up in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll leave the questions for at the end. Sounds good. So we'll just dive into one of these guys. I won't do people and technology. I will. Let's just look at the technology one, for example. If you're on level 1 here, you're doing a lot of manual testing, very little to no automation in your testing. This is considered a more complex app. You don't have the code coverage you need for us to know if we deploy something, if we want to add a feature to your application, did we break something else? Without that testing there, we don't have that insight into that. So kind of like I was saying before, to go from 1 to 2 it's a really it's a nice low hanging fruit, and you get real quick ROI on that. So if you're already a successful company, you're doing well, and you're at a 1, that's great news. That's not a bad thing. That's actually great. I do want to go up to all the way to level 5 on this one. Chaos Monkey is something that this one's really fun, and it takes a while to get to this point, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was made pretty popular by Netflix. And what Chaos Monkey does is it follows the principles of chaos engineering, and this is a tool that will randomly terminate virtual machines or containers in your environment. And what this does is it exposes engineers to failures on a pretty frequent basis, and it really incentivizes them to build resilient services. And a resilient service in this case would be not something that has to be, another team's API died, I'm going to spin up another API that just looks like that and go on. It's how do I handle that with elegance? How do I not hard fail if something else is going down? So once you get up towards the higher levels of maturity, you can start to look at really exciting things like that. All right, so we're going to keep moving along here. So some solutions we talked about, mentioned the one public monitoring dashboard. I also talked about, hey, measure outcomes, not outputs. That would be like new customer acquisitions, not number of features delivered.
and vertically aligned teams, which I know we didn't get to talk a lot about, but that really comes down to making sure you have a full stack dedicated team to each product. So the last few things I'm going to plow through here right now is a lot of these issues, a lot of these things that we're seeing are things that Impact Group and Elko have been able to go in and help different clients on, and we love going in together and making sure that that you have a reliable product that you're going to always know what's going on there. Now, Impact Group has a lot of really great tools that they use to make sure your networking is where it should be, where your servers, your VMs, your infrastructure is there. They have great tools for help desk. Elko works more on the application side, and we were not very impressed with what we saw out there in the matter of the tools to help manage and even provision some software. So we ended up internally making our own software that we're not right now calling the Elco App Builder. And it's and what this helps us do is this is an example of a dashboard that we have put into that we have up, I'm going to say, in our office, that when we're monitoring applications, it is up there and always going. You have everything that you need in one spot to help manage your application. So if there's something that's going wrong, those health checks, if you're not getting that green thumbs up and there's a red there, we all know we're all on the same page. The business side, the engineering side is all there to work on resolving that problem, getting that from the red back to the green thumbs up. There's also some other really exciting features here that I'm not going to dive too deeply into, but if you want to applications quickly, we have the ability to not do that over the course of days or weeks like other people are doing, but we can get that down to 10 minutes. We actually worked with a client recently that years ago, I should say, I worked with a client that took over 6 months and spent millions of dollars spinning up their infrastructure. And while it was enterprise grade and it was great, there wasn't anything all that special about that. We did something very similar recently in a few weeks, and I can tell you it was a lot less than $1 million to do that. So, so what does this kind of mean? Well, Elko and Impact Groups, we are definitely a vertically aligned team. We have, unlike having a separate infrastructure team, a separate application team, a separate networking team, we have found a way to work together and not throw things over the wall, but you have a dedicated resource to each of your products to make sure that they are alive and well. You also have a great resource with Elko to reduce the complexity in applications. When we're managing our application, it's in our best interest, it's in your best interest to not just make sure it's up and running, but to improve it over time. And a big improvement is going through doing those audits to make sure it's less complex. And the other, I should say, the last great thing too is that with Impact Group and Elko, you have a team that doesn't only just manage your applications, your products, your software, but if you need the ability to add in more integrations, add in more features, we have you covered there as well. So if any of this interests you, or if you want to talk about that, that sheet that we're going to make available later today on the DevOps assessment, feel free to get in touch. We love talking to you guys about all of this, and looking forward to hearing from you guys in a little bit. I should finish out with looking forward to hearing any questions that you guys have on that matter in the future, and even right now. So, George, that is my presentation. Any questions that you have?
Yeah, I was wondering if you can touch a little bit on the role of AI or machine learning today or going forward into the future. Are you integrating any AI or machine learning currently, or do you see this something as a future trend?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and we have some partners that kind of like we have built the Elco App Builder. They have we built the Elco App Builder to quickly provision up applications. They have built something similar that helps you really do some really cool AI work there. And if you're talking about AI, you're talking more about getting a lot more to the rights of that DevOps maturity assessment model. That's not low-hanging fruit, right? You're going to want to do some other things first, but absolutely in the past we have work to, say, create some bots that, might automatically restart a service, or hey, find that there's an issue and bring up the information to the developer so they can resolve this problem more efficiently. And while we have those bots that are automated, what AI, how that comes into play is understanding the patterns in the past and knowing what is going to give you the highest probability of resolving this from understanding what's happened before. I can draw a pattern from this. Here are the bots that I'm going to deploy to resolve this specific issue this time. Is that sufficient? Do you have a follow-up question to that?
No, that's great. I thought that was a good way to zero in on exactly what how you see the application of AI beyond the general hopes that this helps the whole entire process. And just a little bit on security, like how much of a burden do you think security is on enterprises in this entire app development process?
Yeah.
And what do you see being done better going forward from using your approach?
Sure. So I had actually a recent podcast on security where we covered a lot of these topics, and really what we have found is that a lot of times security is an afterthought, right? It's the business is putting pressure on the developers to get features out to market as quickly as you can, and security really only plays a role in slowing that down. Or that's kind of the classical way of thinking about it. So what we have done to help reduce that friction is, as part of the Elco App Builder, and if you remember that pipeline that I showed you, we give you most of that for free. That if you can have security built into your system from the get-go, it's a lot less manual work down the road. And the way you set this up to help this to be secure from the start and manual or secure by default is going to reduce a lot of that time and that friction that you're going to the time and friction to have to do that down the road. So to answer your question, yes, security is a really important thing to us, and it's part of kind of the holistic approach of how you're going to build an application. But if you can get some best practices in early, it's going to be a lot easier for you down the road.
Well, I think that we'll wrap it up at this point. I just wanted to remind everyone that the contact information for Elko and Impact will be included in this podcast, in this webinar, as well as in the blog post that you might be accessing at a later date. For those of you who are watching on demand, just reach out to us through the email that you received this information from, and we'll be happy to put you in touch with Elko and see how your app can become reality, or an existing app perhaps could be optimized. And the team over there will be happy to look at your project and figure out what they can do for you and bring it closer to market, faster to market, at a better rates than what the marketplace is offering today. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate you jumping in on a call with Impact Webinars. I appreciate the partnership and your vision for technology. We'll look forward to having you as a guest at a later date. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.